Hello everyone and welcome. In this video I'm gonna be showing how I painted the little fish familiar from the Silver Tower box. So I'm starting off with Macragge blue and I'm painting that on his belly to create a blue OSL effect. Now, to create that OSL effect, I have picked out all the lower facing surfaces of the Fishy Familiar. So you want to pick out his belly, the underside of his tail, for example, the undersides of his legs, things like that. Try not to pick out more than you actually think is needed for the OSL effect. Since we'll be moving on to a more red-orangey color for the top side, if you, obviously if you combine red with blue you get purple. But I don't want a purple transition between the two colors, so if you pick out more than actually necessary with the Macragge blue, you're gonna create purple when you move over it with the Mephiston red. So try to really keep your OSL blue layer limited to the area you want it. So you can create the top layer over the black primer. And while this limits the purple you get, you'll still run the risk of creating a bit of a purple transition, but with basically careful painting, this will be barely noticeable. After you're happy with your base coat of Macragge blue on the underside, you can move on to the top side, and we're starting with a base coat of Mephiston red. Now, as I said before, you don't want to create purple, so be careful not to hit the Macragge blue with your Mephiston red. Just skim along the edges. You do want to paint the whole model, obviously, and not have a line of black showing through. So you do have to hit the edge of the Macragge blue with your Mephiston red. This will create a tiny bit of purple, but just careful brush strokes will limit this purple, and basically don't go over it too much. Mephiston red is a pretty translucent color, so it will take quite a few layers to create an opaque finish, but this helps with the purple as well. Because it's a translucent color, you don't immediately get a purple line. So by just hitting the edge, you do apply some color to the edge of the Macragge blue, but you don't make it really purple. Now, after you're happy with your Mephiston red, and you really want to create an opaque layer with the Mephiston red, and after that you can move on to the Waltrider red. Now this step is gonna take some work. With the Waltrider red, you want to start with picking out your highlight points. Now I'm going for a simple top-down light source, and you want to use the Waltrider red to start the build-up from the Mephiston red towards your highlight point, which is gonna be Fire Dragon Bright. Now, the Waltrider red is not as saturated as either the Mephiston red or the Fire Dragon Bright will be, but I think it works as a nice transition color between those two to create that a little bit of red still showing through and ending up with a bright orangey color. it's gonna take a few passes with the Wild Rider Red, but as you can see, I am starting to pick out the points where my light is hitting the model. So basically this will be mostly of course the top of the model, and also the top of ridges and edges like the fins, the tail, stuff like that. I'm just picking out the points that I think, well, this is where the light will hit my model, and if I apply paint here it will look good. For me, it's not about 100% realism, but it's more about what do I think will look good on a model, and basically, yeah, catch your eye. Now as I'm applying the Wild Rider Red, I'm using tiny brush strokes, tiny feathery brush strokes to create the transition between the Mephiston Red and the Wild Rider Red. And I'm building up the color as well. So I'm basically starting out with a layer and then I'm adding another layer, but it's a tiny bit smaller. So you already create a bit of a transition between the colors. And this way of painting makes it easier to, when I will glaze a tiny little bit with the Mephiston Red, but I don't have to glaze too much. I also don't want the model to be completely red, and Mephiston Red is obviously a red color. So this makes sure I just need to glaze a tiny little bit because I've already applied the transition with my brush strokes. Since red is, all the GW reds are pretty translucent colors, this makes creating the transition easier as well. Because they're so translucent, they take a lot of layers to build up towards their actual color. So this means you have to go over the same spot a lot of times to create the color you want, to create the Wild Rider Red in this case. And because you have to go over a spot so many times, you can create the transition you want. So with the first layer, you still have a lot of Mephiston Red showing through. With the second layer, you make it a tiny bit smaller and you have a little less Mephiston Red showing through. And with the third layer, it's again a little bit smaller, but you have almost no Mephiston Red showing through anymore. And then the final layer, you have no Mephiston Red showing through anymore. This is just an example. I'm not 100% sure how many passes I make over a model. It's just it's basically just a process. When I'm painting, I'm not keeping count. I'm just continuing till I'm happy with the result I'm getting. And while I'm painting, I'm constantly keeping in mind where my light is coming from. So what my shadow areas are going to be and what my highlight points are going to be. And just pick out those and basically create the effect I want. So after the Wild Rider Red, you can move on to the Fire Dragon Bright. Now this is the last color I'm going to be using on the top of the Familiar. And basically you want to, the highlight points, the points you think catch the most light, you want to paint them with the Fire Dragon Bright. So this will be the hard edges catching light, the top of the model, the top of the tail fins, the fins, top of his head, things like that. Now you don't want to go over everything you've just done with the Wild Rider Red with Fire Dragon Bright, so make sure to keep the layer of Fire Dragon Bright a little bit smaller than the Wild Rider Red. So you have that nice transition still showing between all the colors. The Fire Dragon Bright is a really nice color. It's still pretty translucent, but it's very saturated, so you can easily see the differences in color between the Fire Dragon Bright and the Wild Rider Red. You can still easily create the nice transition because it's still a translucent color, so whenever you put down a line you don't see hard edges, for example. But because of its saturation, of its brightness, you don't have to put down endless layers to make it show. It's really easy to get the saturation back up with this color. The Wild Rider Red desaturated the model a little bit from the Mephiston Red, and then now the Fire Dragon Bright is bringing that saturation back up again. I really like it. It's a nice, vibrant color, and its translucency enables me to create that nice transition while still giving that very saturated look. And with the Fire Dragon Bright, it's a really saturated color, so you're giving the model a nice, vibrant, saturated look by using this one. And while the Wild Rider Red toned it down a little bit, it desaturated the model a little bit, the Fire Dragon Bright is bringing that saturation right back up again. Now, as you can see, I'm just going over all the tiny details, the hard ridges, the parts that I think catch the light, and just finishing up the model with that nice orange look. And you can continue this process till you're happy with the result. After I'm done with the Fire Dragon Bright, I'm moving on to Sotek Green for the underside of the Familiar. Now, to create an OSL effect, you have to do the exact opposite of an highlight. Since your light source is actually coming from the underside of the model, you want to create the brightest spots on the lowest point. And this is what I'm doing with the Sotek Green. So I'm picking out the underside of his belly, and he has his belly has a sort of bulge on the side. So the underside of that as well, underside of his gill, underside of his jaw, underside of the upper jaw as well, underside of his tail, and so on. I'm sorry for my face actually getting in the way a couple of times, and also for the bit blurry quality. I forgot to reset the focus on my camera because I'm painting the underside, so the model is a bit further away from the camera, and I had to reset the focus for that, but yeah, I forgot. So it's just I'm showing how I paint the Sotek Green really fast, because a lot of it is really blurry, and that's, well, not that fun to watch that for very long. I'm just showing how I pick out the underside of the ridges on his tail. They stick out more, so they catch some of the blue OSL effect as well. Now, after I'm done with the Sotek Green, I'm moving on to the glazing. I'm starting off with a glaze of Mephiston red. As you can see on the screen, you see me create the glaze. I'm using a Winsor & Newton Series 7 1 brush for glazing. It's a bit of a larger brush, and this makes the glazing a bit easier and faster as well. It's still a brush, a pretty new brush. It still has a sharp tip, and this helps as well, because it enables me to pick out the spot I want to glaze instead of glazing over everything I don't want to hit as well. Now, as you can see, I'm also glazing the Mephiston red a little bit over the Troll Slayer orange. I don't want to go over my highlight of the Troll Slayer orange too much, but I do want to hit it a little bit, so I create a smoother transition. Now, this glaze dulls down the Troll Slayer orange a little bit, of course, but that is why after glazing with the Mephiston red, I will be glazing with a bit of Troll Slayer orange again as well, just to get that really saturated orange color back into the model. After I'm done with the glaze of the Mephiston red, I'm moving on with a glaze of Troll Slayer orange. This is created in the same way as the other glaze. Just add some paint to the well palette and then add some water. Now, the Troll Slayer orange glaze is mostly used to get the saturation back into the model. So what I'm doing is I'm glazing from the Mephiston red parts towards the Troll Slayer orange parts I already painted on. Basically glazing from my shadow point towards my highlight spot. As you can see, when I'm glazing, I'm switching both sides of the model. This is so that the side I just glazed can dry. So it's easier to paint the complete model before you start glazing. So you can easily switch between sides, letting the side you just glazed dry, moving on to the other side, and then you can go back and forth. And you don't have to stop and wait for the paint to dry. And there you go, that's basically it. Just go over all the spots you want to get the Troll Slayer orange color again, the high saturation again, and go over it a couple of times. After I'm done with the glazing, I'm gonna paint the tiny scales on the tail of the familiar. Now, I forgot to show the colors. on the camera, so I'll be naming them as I go along. First off, I am starting with Mephiston Red. Then I'm moving on to Fire Dragon Bright, and I'm ending with Dorn Yellow. Now, starting off with the Mephiston Red, I am painting tiny red lines randomly located on his tail. So it's not like I'm creating an even pattern or they're in specific places. No, it's just I want to create a scaly pattern. So I'm just picking out random spots, not too close together, not too far apart, trying to create that scaled look. Now, after you've created those random lines, that random pattern with the Mephiston Red, you can move on to the Fire Dragon Bright. Now it gets a bit more precise with the Fire Dragon Bright, because instead of just randomly picking out the spots where you paint, you want to try and just add a little bit of the Fire Dragon Bright on top of a Mephiston Red line. So the Mephiston Red then looks like a shadow, and the Fire Dragon Bright is the start of a highlight of your scale, so the sharp edge. Now the Fire Dragon Bright is also, you can create a bit of a bigger line with that, because you want to go over it with the Dorn Yellow still as well, and the Dorn Yellow is your ultimate highlight. So if you create a little bit of a bigger spot with the Fire Dragon Bright, it is still showing even after you went over it with the Dorn Yellow. And then with the Dorn Yellow, it's just basically pick out a tiny, this time you go for dots, just create tiny dots on your Fire Dragon Bright spots you created before. Now I only went for the tail bit, not the whole fishy, because I was happy with my with the colors I created, with the smooth transitions on the familiar. So when you create this pattern on top of it, it kinda destroys all the work you just put in. So that's why I just kept it minimized to only the tail portion. It's just a nice little touch, a little freehand on top of the familiar. But I did not want to destroy all the work I put in before. So on the lower part of the tail, you have a bit of a transition going from skin to scales. Now, to create a bit of a transition there, I did not highlight some scales with the Dorn Yellow. To make it a bit more smooth, I left some scales with just the shadow of the Mephiston Red and the highlight of Fire Dragon Bright. So after the scales, there's only the eyes and teeth left. Now I'm starting with the eyes. So what I did was leaving the edges of the eye black, creating a core of blue, the Macragge blue. And then with the black, I created a little dot in the middle of the Macragge blue. And then as the last step for the eyes, you want to create two tiny ivory dots at the top of the eye. The outermost is a little bit bigger than the innermost, and you want the innermost to touch the little black dot in the middle a little bit. And then after the eyes is just the teeth left. and I'm picking those out with Morghast bone and then a little bit of ivory. I did not paint them black again or anything. It still shows the colors of the blue and the red and everything. So I just went over that with the Morghast bone, and then added some dots of ivory to the tips of the teeth. And that's it. That brings us to the end of my video. Thank you guys for watching, and I hope you enjoyed.